Dr. Patel said, I should say just Patel, that wouldn't it be great if they could do a living autopsy? And they had a laugh over the patient's head and decided they would get him to theatre as quick as they could. And it was so fast that they started to go while the oxygen was still connected to the wall. So I had to stop the bed and disconnect the oxygen, and it was their appearance and their behavior was, the way they were speaking about it was, we've got to get there quick before he dies so we can open him up and watch him die. There was no discussion about saving him. It was going to, wouldn't it be fun to have a living autopsy?
Hello, my name is Rob Messenger. I'm a former state parliamentarian. In March 2005, a Queensland health nurse, Tony Hoffman, from the Bundaberg Hospital, pleaded for me to do something about a doctor she worked with, Jane Patel. I made a speech in the Queensland Parliament where I called on the government to stand aside Jane Patel pending the results of an investigation. The government was ultimately forced to establish 2 Royal Commission investigations, and criminal charges were eventually brought against Mr. Patel. I'd like you, please, to take a few minutes and listen to some of Jane Patel's forgotten former co-workers, patients and their relatives. I make no comment about the guilt or innocence of former government employee Jane Patel. Under our law, he has the right to a presumption of innocence. However, Patel's former co-workers, patients and their relatives also have a right to a freedom of speech in our country. Their complaints are so serious and are of such public importance, I honestly believe they override any law or legal convention which attempts to keep them silent.
Was Patel treating my husband? I'd say yes. Yes, and when it came to the commission up there, when they started doing the inquiries, they said, yes, you've got a case because Patel was the man. What did Patel say to me? He was kneeling down, the husband was lying on the bed, the nurse was alongside of him having a look at his leg. All they were doing was sort of bathing it. And I said, could I have a look? And so I had a look and I said, oh yeah, the bottom half is held beautifully. They took the stitches all out of the bottom. But I said that I don't like that black piece in it. And it was Patel that I realised it was him now, put his head up to me and just said, what, do you think something's going to jump out of it? And he just got up and stood up, and I just looked at him and I said, you bloody arrogant bastard, to him. And he just threw his head and walked away. And this nurse said, yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, and just went on with it. And I mean, that's the sort of thing you got from him. Why did he die and how? Well, as I said, the germ got into his leg. It was golden staph, or whatever you like to call it. And they just never stopped it. And it just kept going. And when it goes through, when you get that, you know, through it just goes from one organ to the other and follows the bone and goes right through, and that's what it did. And that's what they did. And instead of him, when he found it was there, as one doctor did say to me, he should have been sent straight to Brisbane. Well, they didn't do anything. I said to him, how are you going to stop it? Oh, we're giving him antibiotics, but that wouldn't kill it. And then he just went. Did Patel stop my husband going to Brisbane? Apparently, yes. Apparently they said that, he said it could be treated here in Bundaberg. Been married 50 years in the May, that he died that October. How much in compensation for a death? Well, I got the funeral money back plus 10,000 as compensation. She called the 10,000 the compensation. She said that's as much as we're allowed to give. Apparently I didn't grieve properly, but I said to her, look, I had a nervous breakdown when my father died. I'd lost my son not quite 2 years before my husband, quite suddenly, and I said I certainly wasn't going to let myself go to pieces again this time.
Patel did a procedure on me where he said that he would rectify the cancer that I possibly have, and confirm that I have or have not got prostate cancer, and he told me at the end of the procedures that I was clear of cancer and I had nothing to worry about.
And do you have something to worry about?
I have a lot to worry about because I do have cancer, and it's a prostate cancer, and it is increasing now in its readings of the blood tests I have, and it is a worry. If I was correctly diagnosed by Patel of cancer, I would have had a very big percentage of a chance of having it diagnosed and treated properly. Now my chances of survival now are unknown because the cancer is going up. I have had radiation treatment for 7 weeks, and it helped for a short period of time, but now it's reversed and it's going the other way.
Did Patel scream at me? Yes, he did. When I said that I could still feel, I could feel the needle going in, he yelled at me and actually told me not to be such a baby, and that it'll be over in a minute. Do I believe that Patel was deliberately cruel to patients? Yes, I do. The instance where he allowed me to suffer for so long, and then having stitched up my wounds without anaesthetic, without general anaesthetic, which should have been used. He then used a local anaesthetic and then abused me because I said it hurt. And he said, well, local anaesthetics do not work so far down. The wounds were at least 2 inches deep at that time, and I was lying on the bed and perspiring madly. I had people holding my feet down. I had one nurse wiping my head, and he just went on and on and on and just kept stitching me up. And I was told Dr. Patel to stop, but he said you can't do anything different because the local anaesthetic doesn't go down so far. And I said it should be done by general anaesthetic, and he said no. He said it'll only take a while. And I said, well, I might as well die. I said that's all I want to do is just let me die. That was my whole thing for the full 3 weeks that I was in hospital. Just let me die.
I had just been a nurse for 14 months, still trying to work out my career and how patients were treated. And we had a man who, we had a resuscitation call for him. We attended there, assisted with it. Dr. Patel was part of it. And I remember the patient deteriorating a bit. I couldn't say for sure if Dr. Patel had worked out what he thought was wrong with the patient. Anyway, he and the anaesthetists over the patient's head decided, Dr. Patel said, I should say just Patel, that he wouldn't it be great if they could do a living autopsy? They had a laugh over the patient's head and decided they would get him to theatre as quick as they could. And it was so fast that they started to go while the oxygen was still connected to the wall. So I had to stop the bed and disconnect the oxygen, and it was, their appearance and their behavior was, the way they were speaking about it was, we've got to get there quick before he dies so we can open him up and watch him die. There was no discussion about saving him. It was going to, wouldn't it be fun to have a living autopsy? I did a report on it and gave it to my unit manager at the time, and she called me in her office and closed the door and said, I'm just going to give this back to you. I don't think it should go in the chart. I'll get someone else to write the report on that resuscitation.
Nurse whistleblower Christine Cameron, widower Evelyn Tucker, and former Patel patients George Pauser and Doris Hillier all have important concerns and want their questions about Jane Patel answered by the politicians who govern Queensland today.
I said I'd like to feel that we go into hospital and be treated by proper doctors, not someone who thinks they are. And I said the amount of doctors was up there at the hospital and let one doctor just rule and do all this, I cannot understand. And they couldn't either. I said that is what's got me. I mean, why the hell and how they could go for so long without anybody saying anything, it's just beyond belief, I think.
Did it come out in the commission that Patel wasn't a doctor? Yes, it did come out that he wasn't qualified, he wasn't registered. He hadn't been privileged or credentialed, so therefore he should not have operated on anybody. My daughter have allowed Patel to operate on me. If she had known he was not qualified, no, my daughter would not have allowed him to even touch me. Apart from Patel, who lied about his qualifications, who else is responsible? We could start off with the Wavelength Employment Agency, go on then to the Queensland Medical Board, then go up to the manager up here at the hospital, Mr. Peter Leck and Dr. Darren Keating.
Would I let Patel treat me if I knew he wasn't qualified or registered? I definitely would not. I mean, that's not even, it comes into my mind to let somebody do procedures on me that could be life-threatening. I want the Attorney General to answer my questions before any legal strategy is decided on. I certainly do. I think it's imperative that he answers my questions because there's a lot of information that he's probably not aware of and should be made aware of it.
During Mr. Patel's latest pre-trial submissions, Justice Freeberg described the state-appointed lawyer's actions as atrocious, incomplete, incomprehensible and embarrassing. After one Royal Commission was shut down due to a legal mistake, Patel's only guilty finding overturned due to another legal mistake, and the latest public comments from Justice Freeberg about the state government employees' atrocious, incomplete, incomprehensible and embarrassing performance. Understandably, Christine, Evelyn, George, Doris and I questioned the competence of Queensland's lawyers and politicians. If the Queensland Government's legal strategy to pursue Mr. Patel isn't publicly discussed, criticised and challenged, and Patel's former patients' voices are censored by a government and a compliant media, then all hope of bringing Mr. Patel's criminal complaints to court in a proper and competent manner, with the greatest chance of success, will be lost. The key questions that need to be answered right now by our state's first law officer, the Attorney General Jared Blage, who has the power to bring his own criminal charges against Jayant Patel, are these. Why do you allow our lawyers to prosecute Mr. Patel as a doctor, when the evidence brought before two Royal Commissions strongly suggests that Patel was not properly registered, credentialed or privileged? And therefore, arguably, it was illegal for him to be allowed to treat any of his 1,500 patients. Why do you prefer to adopt a legal strategy which presumes Patel is a properly registered doctor and focuses on his clinical skills rather than his clinical qualifications, which have always been in doubt? Why do you allow your lawyers to ignore a recommendation from a retired Supreme Court Judge and Royal Commissioner Geoffrey Davies that Mr. Patel should be charged with fraud? Why do you allow your lawyers to also ignore Commissioner Davies' findings that others, including members of the Medical Board, senior health bureaucrats and politicians, had acted negligently in hiring Mr. Patel and allowing him to continue to work for 2 years as an allegedly qualified doctor in Bundaberg? There are many more questions that must be answered and discussions had before further legal action proceeds against Jayant Patel. There is still much uncertainty. However, what is not uncertain are these facts. Silence and more political cover-up will not deliver justice to nurse Christine Cameron, who tried to blow the whistle on an allegedly live autopsy, a medical procedure that doesn't exist. Silence and more political cover-up will not deliver justice to Evelyn Tucker and the families of 86 people who officially died while being treated and cut open by a government employee who has significant doubts over his qualifications. Nor will silence and more political cover-up deliver justice to George Pauser, Doris Hillier and the approximately 1,500 other Bundaberg people who thought they were as safe as possible at their local government-run hospital. Jayant Patel was hired, rewarded and protected for 2 years by the Government of Queensland. A week after my speech in Parliament, the Government of Queensland flew Jayant Patel secretly back to the United States. It's now up to the Government of Queensland, Premier Newman and Attorney General Jared Blage to make sure that in any future legal action, all the facts come out about Jayant Patel in a competently and fairly run trial.